Many of the problems that we're finding in our world today, the experts are telling us we're facing a time unlike any other time in recorded human history where the greatest challenges ever posed to civilization are being experienced right now. And what makes this such a powerful time in history is that for the first time, as far as we know, the first time in recorded human history, the decisions and the choices that we make have the power to either ensure our survival or end civilization as we've known it. And we've never had that power before. And we've never had to face those kinds of decisions before. Do you all feel the magnitude of what this time in history is all about? What our lives are all about? It doesn't have to be a sad time, but it certainly is a powerful time. It only seems sad to people who feel powerless and helpless and victims in this world. And my goal by the end of our time here today is to share with you the reasons why 5,000, 6,000, 7,000-year-old traditions told us that we are not victims in this world, either of what happens in our bodies or what happens in the world around us, and how our own science is now coming to the same conclusions. The question is, now that modern science is recognizing that we are directly influencing what happens in our world, scientists are saying, okay, yeah, the influence is there, but what do we do with it? How do we use it? How do we apply it in our lives? And this is so interesting to me because I was trained in the language of science, and I come from the world of science. Science is good. It is a language that describes our universe and our bodies and how we work. Science is good. It's simply a language that describes how the universe works and how we work. But it's a relatively recent language. Science is only about 300 years old. And as good as it is, the best scientists will admit that there are glaring gaps and inconsistencies in what we know in the language of science, on the one hand. On the other hand, there are other languages that have always described the way our universe works in our bodies. They're not scientific, but they've been around a lot longer. Some of them have been around 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years in the case of the Hindu Vedas. So as a scientist working behind the scenes during the Cold War, a very frightening time in the history of our world, my question was this, was if science and ancient spirituality are the two great ways of knowing in our world, and neither one of them alone can solve the problems, what happens if we marry them together? Doesn't that make sense to you? It makes tremendous sense. What if we marry the wisdom of a 5,000, 6,000, 7,000-year-old tradition with the best science of today into a greater wisdom? Will that help us to find the language to address the challenges of our time today? That was my feeling. My conditioning, however, was that science and spirituality are mutually incompatible. You have to choose one path or the other. I'm going to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. And where the greatest advances are being made in understanding how the universe works today and how your body works and how your relationships work is when we cross those traditional boundaries between science and spirituality. Honoring both, but crossing the boundary that keeps them separate and marrying them into a greater wisdom, because that's the way we work. Well, what has really, really begun to move this is that the science that our civilization is based upon today is based in two false assumptions. One is the assumption that about 96% of the universe contains empty space, and the other is that our inner experiences of thought, feeling, emotion, and belief have no effect on our outer world. You and I know we're at this conference, so we know that nothing could be further from the truth. But this is a very, very different way for mainstream science and for the majority of the Western world to think about our lives. Fair and balanced news doesn't think about our lives this way. So these are the false assumptions of science. The reason we know they are false is because of the new discoveries. Number one, the discovery of an intelligent field of energy that links everything. It connects everything. And this field, I want to talk about, this field isn't out there somewhere. It's moving through you. It is you right now. You are that field. Every atom in your body, right this minute, and the minute that just passed, and that minute that just passed, every atom in your body in this very instant is emerging anew from this field, as long as your agreement in consciousness will allow that to happen. When you dishonor your agreement in consciousness, then the new cannot re-emerge and you begin to deteriorate. And if it happens long enough, you're no longer in this world. The field isn't, when people talk about this field, their arms go like this. There's a field out there somewhere. Well, it is out there, and it's in here. It's everywhere. This intelligent field is where everything comes from. It's a place. It's a pure space where all things begin. It's the blueprint of all possibilities, the template of everything that could ever be, from the lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark, all of your divorces, all of your marriages, all of the children you have, all the children that you never had, all of the peace, all of the war, all of the joy, all the suffering. It exists as a potential in this field. And what we do, and I'm going to share with you from the ancient perspective and the scientific perspective how we do this. But what we do is this. You and I, in our minds, we reach into that field of possibilities because we visualize what it is we choose to have. And for many people, they stop there, and it's not enough. It's not enough. They stop with the visualization. They see it, they do some mantras, they do some affirmations, and nothing happens, and they get frustrated, and they become disillusioned. That's not enough. Once you identify it, once you lock it into place, you've got to give it life. And the way we do that is the great secret that was lost in the Judeo-Christian tradition 1,700 years ago. That's what we're going to go into today, because it is the power of emotion and belief and feeling, and we're going to define these. That is what it is that breathes life into that possibility that makes it real in our world. I think, for me, I'm a very visual person. My man brain likes pictures, okay? So my man brain liked to see these pictures. This was an image from the Hubble Space Telescope, the visual image looking at the center of the universe where everything began, those two arrows, and seeing everything, the stars and the galaxies, as separate. And the next image is the same image looking through the eyes of the Chandra Space Observatory, looking and imaging what has believed to be the invisible stuff that connects everything together. And you can see very clearly that things aren't separate, that there's a field of energy. And this is just one wavelength. There are other wavelengths of this field that do the same thing. This field is known by many different names because scientists have yet to agree on one term. It's called the quantum hologram, simply the field, nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Max Planck, father of quantum theory, called it the matrix. We're calling it the divine matrix. And this matrix is what we're going to be, the term that we'll be using today, is this underlying field of energy that provides the container for the entire universe, the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds, and a mirror in our bodies for what's happening on the outside of our bodies. So this is an encapsulation of what we've done in our work, where we were yesterday. If we're going to use this field, we've got to understand how it works. We've got to speak the language it recognizes. And this leads us to what is called the great spiritual mystery. As different as one appears from another, almost universally, the ancient spiritual traditions tell us that there's something that you and I do in our lives that triggers a process inside of our bodies. And when that process begins, it interacts with the forces of creation and affects our physical world. Something that we do in our lives affects our physical world. If you do not understand how this happens, when it does, we call it a miracle. But if you do understand it, it's no longer a miracle. It becomes a technology. If you can create an experience of your body over and over and over again, on demand, consistently, repeatedly, if you can do something in here and create an effect that touches your world out there, man, that's a technology. And to me, that's a very... Okay, we've piloted this program with young people in secondary schools. And I use different languages, different slides. We have a screen. We use butcher paper from the floor to the ceiling, so the whole wall is the screen, and all the images look very real. It's a technology. And I cannot think of a more powerful technology. This rivals anything we could ever build in a machine outside of our bodies. I've worked in the high-tech industry, and I've seen some very sweet technology, but nothing that rivals what we're doing right here. Well, the scientific experiments now are showing precisely the same thing. We looked at some yesterday. It's in the book. I won't do them again today. But what they're saying is that heart-based feeling and emotion changes the DNA inside of our bodies, producing quantum effects that change our physical world. We've said the same thing. And when we do this, we are all participating. We're participating in what happens in our world and our lives. And it's all based on what we believe about our world. So the new discoveries are telling us the power to change our bodies and our world is actually based on something that sounds very non-scientific. It's based on what we call feeling and belief. The feeling and the belief of what is real. So I thought that would be a good place to define feeling and belief. Everybody's talking about it. I sat in on a program yesterday, and then I've heard some other speakers use the terms feeling and belief, but no one's really defined it. And I think it's useful to do that because it means different things to different people. So let's look at an old Sanskrit drawing. This is a page right off an ancient Sanskrit text. You're all familiar with the energy centers, the chakras, that are linked to the endocrine glands in your bodies. So the mineral content of the endocrine gland, the crystalline mineral content, is what's linked to these chakras. What the ancient traditions, in this case the Sanskrit traditions, are telling us is there are 7 of these energy systems. The upper 3, the communication and the imaging centers, are, they say, what are considered to be or associated with what we call thought. So when we think about something, we're using these upper energy centers. What they say, however, is that the lower 3 energy centers are where emotion comes from, and they say that you and I are capable of only 2 primary emotions, and that's all. And Mom and I have this conversation with Mom all the time about the difference between feeling and emotion. Mom says, I always thought feeling and emotion were pretty much the same thing, and I did too. I was raised in a very conservative community in the Midwest, and we use them almost interchangeably. But the ancients make a distinction, and it's a powerful distinction. They say that we're capable of only 2 primary emotions, love and whatever you believe, whatever you think the opposite of love is. Maybe it's love and fear. When you get right down to the deepest teachings, love and fear are 2 aspects of the same thing. They're very, very closely related, even though they're polarities. They're polarities of the same experience. So what the ancients are saying, in this case the Sanskrit text, they're saying that emotion comes from these lower energy centers, and there are only 2 primary emotions, love or fear. So we think about something in that field of all possibilities. We capture it in our minds. We visualize it. What it is that we'd like to have, our perfect relationship, perfect health, peace in our world, abundance in the checkbook, whatever it is. And the piece that was left out in many of the teachings, and this is what they're saying, is into that thought we pump, we fuel from these lower creative centers. So into that thought we pump our love for what we're thinking, or sometimes subconsciously, our fear for what we're thinking. And when we do, what is the one energy center that's not accounted for? Exactly. It's our heart, and when we do, we create what we call a feeling that is linked with the heart. This is where feeling occurs, heart-based feeling. When we think about something, and into that something, we fuel it with our love or our fear for that something, we create what we call a feeling. And now we have just defined feeling. It's the union of thought and emotion. Sometimes the emotions that we pump into our feelings are conscious. Sometimes they're unconscious. We do entire programs about how to deal with that. That's not where we are here today. What I'd like for you to see from this is that feeling is based in your heart, and that's going to be really important in just a couple of minutes. Feeling and beliefs are very closely linked. When you believe something, you have a strong feeling about that something, one way or another. Would you agree? Yeah, we usually do. Feelings and beliefs are closely related. So when we have experiences of hate, sadness, joy, compassion, those are not emotions, they're feelings. If we're hating, we're generally thinking about something, and into that thought, we're having a fear. We may not always be conscious of what it is, or our sadness or our joy. These are feelings and beliefs. They're not emotions. Are you okay on that? For some people, it's review. For some people, you've never seen it before. Feeling and belief. The reason that they are so powerful in our lives is because they are a code, literally a code. Feeling and belief is a code that translates those invisible waves of possibility into the stuff our world, our universe, our bodies are made of. Belief literally takes the invisible waves of possibility, collapses, condenses those waves into the particles that become the reality of our world. Then what it tells you, if it does make sense, it tells you that we are only limited by what we are willing to allow ourselves to believe. By what we're allowing ourselves to visualize and love into this world. So, how does that work? Remember back in the old days, probably when you were in school, when I was in school, and maybe when your kids are in school right now, when we learned about the atom looked something like this. Remember, it looked like a little solar system. It was a thing in the middle with other things that are rotating around it, electrons. This is the nucleus and the electron. Remember that? Well, if you've looked at the brand new textbooks, those days are long gone. The atoms don't look like this anymore. They don't even talk. Remember, electron, proton, neutron, we thought that was tough. Now they're dealing with gluons and muons and gravitons that may or may not be there, and quarks and leptons. And if you're talking about quarks, listen to the spiritual names of the quarks. There are up quarks, down quarks, truth quarks, beauty quarks, strange quarks. And then there's the opposite of all those. There's an up, an anti-truth, anti-beauty, anti-up, anti-down, anti-straight. They don't look like this anymore. Now they're telling us that the atoms look something like this. They aren't things, they are patterns of energy. The quantum atom. Patterns of energy. Electrical energy and magnetic energy. You've all heard this before. We live in an electromagnetic world. Well, if that's true, this is so important. See, for note takers, I put this up here. I knew it would be early this morning, right? Important. If the atoms that everything is made of are made of electrical and magnetic energy, and you want to change that atom, what does it make sense to do? Change the energy. Absolutely. See, you could have written that slide. That's how good the matrix works. We're all in tune here. If you're going to change the atom, you've got to change the energy. What organ creates the strongest electrical field and the strongest magnetic field in your body? And you're saying, I don't know, right? Creates the strongest electrical and magnetic fields in your body. This is a powerful, powerful knowing. Now think about this. You have an organ right now in the center of your chest that is the strongest biological magnetic generator and the strongest biological electrical generator in your body, but you don't have to know any of that. All you're invited to do is have a feeling. If you want to know why your feelings are important and why your beliefs are important, what you're about to see is really sweet. Because our heart now is up to 100 times stronger than the brain in terms of the electrical field. Thoughts are good. They're important. I'm not discounting it, but I'm saying is they're not the whole story, and that it's much easier to create through your feeling world than through your thinking world. And here's the reason why. Your heart's electrical field is up to 100 times stronger than the brain's electrical field, but look at this. The heart's magnetic field is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain's magnetic field. It's not hard to feel. It's not hard to feel as if that spoon is bending, and that's the secret. That's the key to the whole thing. We talked about that Patrick Swayze movie yesterday, Ghost. Patrick Swayze kicking a can, a physical can is a ghost. The way he was conditioned to do it in the physical world. He's a ghost. There's nothing physical to him. He's kicking, and his foot moves right through the can. And it's only when another ghost comes along, he says, hey man, it doesn't work like that here anymore. You got to feel it. And when he felt that can moving, he felt himself connecting with the can. That's how easy it is. Children know this, but it's this little, it's just this little subtle shift in perspective, of feeling. And what I've learned in our intensive workshops is many people in our part of the world are not even aware of the difference between when they're thinking and when they're feeling. And if I ask them, I invite them to create a feeling, they're trying to do it with their mind. However, if we go into a Tibetan monastery, monks and nuns, they live in their hearts. And they have to work to create a thought. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. Does this make sense to you why this is important? Your heart is much more powerful in terms of electrical and magnetic fields, the stuff our world is made of. Feelings and beliefs produce these heart waves of energy, but they're not limited to our hearts. Look at where they go. They go beyond our bodies. From a quantum perspective, you don't end where your skin or your jacket or your hair is in that chair. From a quantum perspective, if I were looking at you through my quantum lens, oh, there you are. You're just a big sea of energy, all melding together in a really beautiful way. Because that's the way we work. And that's what allows us to touch our world in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. Those heart waves change the cells of our bodies, and that's very well documented in the open literature. What is a little challenging for researchers right now is that those heart waves are changing the atoms of our physical world. They know it happens. So I'm going to acknowledge this. Scientists know that you and I can affect the physical world beyond our bodies through what we're creating inside of our hearts. The question is, to what degree? And that is where the controversy is right now. To what degree are we capable of influencing our physical world? If you read the research papers, there's a lot of controversy. This is where the action is right now. And he wrote under the name of Neville. And if you're not familiar with his work, I'm going to invite you to look into it. He wrote a powerful little book. One is called The Power of Awareness. One is called The Law and the Promise. And there's some other ones out there. Each chapter is about a page long. And you read that page and you think about it for a week. It's one of those kinds of books. The Power of Awareness and The Law and the Promise. 1952, Neville was asked why he was writing the books that he was writing. And his response to that question is the reason that we're in here today. Look at what Neville wrote. Neville said he wrote to reveal, this is a quote, our infinite power against which no earthly force is of the slightest significance. Do you believe that it's possible within your body? Do you have a power within you in the chair right now against which no earthly force is of the slightest significance? Do you believe that that's possible? Do you believe you have that? Do you use it? Why not? Because you and I have been conditioned to believe that that power doesn't exist. There's a part of us, there's a part of our ancient memory that clings to that possibility. We want to believe it. And that's why we're so powerfully drawn to the kinds of movies like The Matrix and the old movies back in the Middle Ages where miracles are happening all the time. People are out slaying dragons and falling in love in really cool places and all that. Because we want to believe that those miracles are still possible. But we're conditioned. And that conditioning probably runs deeper than even you and I can even acknowledge. Deeper than I can acknowledge right now. I was raised in a relatively conservative community in northern Missouri. The show me state. And I was told over and over and over again that in this world we're little more than insignificant specks of dust. And that's about it. And that things just happen. You can be walking down the street living a good life and all of a sudden some disease drops out of nowhere and you're gone in 3 weeks. And that was my conditioning. And even though my mind knows that is not the case, there's a part of me subconsciously that heard that so many times. But to some degree, even I still accept that a little bit. But I want to share with you a little bit. Belief. Belief may be the single most powerful force in the universe. If you are capable of imagining anything in your mind and then breathing life into that possibility and feeling it. And when you do that, you're changing the electrical and the magnetic field in your heart and touching the atoms of your physical world to make that happen. Wow, what could be more powerful than that? What could be more powerful than that? What challenge could we not meet? What disease could we not transcend? What war could we not heal? When the general population really, really gets what you and everyone in this conference and myself, what's happening here this weekend, everything changes. It must. When we really get our power. And the beauty is not everyone has to believe or understand the same thing to benefit. And they probably won't. A relatively few number of people will grasp the power and the significance of this language. And it's kind of like the stock market. When a few of the blue chips do well, the whole market can benefit. I don't know where that analogy came from, but it's kind of like, I haven't watched the market for the last couple of days. Belief, the most powerful force in the universe. I want to share with you an example. This is some of the things, I've never shared this in public before. This is from a trip, 1998, a 22-day pilgrimage into the highlands of central China and Tibet. And you've seen some of the images, but this particular portion I've never shared before because it's an ancient example of just how powerful belief really is. This is, we were up above 16,000 feet above sea level. Nothing grows there. It's just you and the earth and the sky and the water and God. Have you ever noticed how whenever prophets and holy people, when they have a revelation, where does it usually come from? Usually someplace up high where there's no diversions, there's no distractions, there's nothing else there, nothing else to do. You might as well, receive a message from God because there's nothing to eat, there's no fish in the water. I mean, nothing's happening. So we were on this road right here, and it was in the spring. They'd had big snows that year. We thought the roads were clear, and they were for most of the trip until we found this. This is a snow slide. Someone has been able to tunnel through to let some traffic past, but we are in a bus that was brought up from the mainland. This is our translator. He's sizing up the front of the bus to see if it's going to fit through this tunnel. It's not, and this is where the trip became a real adventure. We never saw that bus again. We left our bus, walked through our little avalanche, and picked up the only mode of transportation that we could find on the other side. We were all on a cattle truck. To go down, but it was fun, to go down to this mountainside in the entrance to this cave where a miracle happened about 800 years ago. Milarepa, 800 years ago, was a powerful yogi and mystic in his own right. And he came from a wealthy family, very similar to the story of Buddha. He came from a wealthy family, and so he had all the material wealth, and he also had his psychic abilities. A neighboring village invaded his village and killed his entire family, and he was so enraged that he used his psychic powers to kill at least 35 other people. And when he had done that, he realized that it was a misuse of his power. And from that moment on, his life changed. He left all of his material possessions, all of his wealth behind. He went into a series of caves, and this is one of them. And he never left again. And he stayed through the end of his life to deepen his inner abilities and to honor the gift of life, hoping in some way to compensate for the misuse of his power. The few people that did find him, he had some clothing when he went to this cave. He learned the inner power of psychic heat, so he never had to have clothing for warmth, and his clothing became tattered and shredded. The only thing he ate were the nettles that grow at this elevation around this cave that are rich in chlorophyll. And his hair and his body turned a vibrant green that stayed with him for the rest of his life. And they said if you happen to come up on Milarepa in his cave, it was a frightening sight because his hair was down to his waist, it was green, his body was green, his teeth were kind of yellow-green. He didn't have a lot of clothes on, so it was a pretty scary thing to see. But there were some students that did go and study with him. And one of the things that he was trying to share with them is the power of their belief and that they are not bound by the physicality of this world. And one of the ways that he went about doing that, he lived in the cave. And one of his students said, "Don't you feel confined in this cave?" He said, this cave provides me shelter. He says, but it doesn't confine me. Here, I'll show you. And he walked over to the wall of the cave, and he put his hand up against the cave. He pushed on that solid wall, the native earth. And to his student, he felt that wall was a boundary, and then Milarepa kept pushing, and his hand went right into that rock. And it happened in a number of places. And I walked over to this place, and I put my hand, it's about 16 inches deep, that he went into the cave wall. And I thought, well, maybe somebody hoaxed it. And when I put my hand in there, it fits so perfectly in that place. I felt in that moment that it couldn't have been hoaxed. And then there are other places in this cave where he did the same with his feet. And the whole point of this is that in his mind, in his belief, the wall was not a boundary. And he embodied that and shared that with his student. When his student saw that happen, his student had to do one of two things. He either had to rearrange his belief system to accommodate what he'd just seen, or he had to walk out of the cave and say, I'm never coming back here again. And this is one of the ways we change our beliefs. We change our beliefs either by being shown the logical reason why something is true or it's not true, and that goes through our mind, logic. or we're shown a miracle that bypasses our mind and goes right to our heart, and we've seen it with our own eyes, and it forever changes the way we see our world. Was that a miracle, or was it a technology? It depends on how you think about your world. This is a huge concept, and I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not doing justice to this concept, and I want to introduce it to you. If you are not aware, what we're about to discuss here, this is the buzz, it's the hot topic, it's the controversy, it's the cool stuff that everybody is talking about at the water cooler, in the back room of the physics departments of the major university, mainstream physicists and scientists. These aren't old guys and girls out on the park bench feeding the pigeons wondering what the next hot topic is going to be. And it's sort of underground because it is so out there, yet it makes so much sense. You ready? Okay, here's the question. This is the question that's being asked. And just work with me through this. The very serious question that physicists are asking is about the nature of our universe and our reality. And it's going to sound like a philosophical question, except it gets very real very quickly. They're asking this question: is the universe that we're living in a virtual reality? Is the universe that we're living in a simulation that has been created for us to have an experience here that we cannot have anywhere else? Sounds like a movie, doesn't it? Where do you think that movie came from? Is the universe really a very ancient virtual reality? Now, we're not talking about who or what or why. I mean, all kinds of questions come up. The question they're asking, is it possible that you and I could be living in a world that's not so real? Let me ask, what have the Aboriginal traditions said to us for about 20,000 years? What do they say about this world? Is this the real world? No, they say it's a dream world. Where's the real world? Somewhere else, right? Christian traditions, what do they say about this world? We're here for a while, but where's the real cool, sweet place to be? Where is it? Hereafter heaven, somewhere else. Native American traditions say the same thing. So this idea is not so bizarre from the perspective of many ancient traditions. Are we living a simulation? Okay, well, my man brain, when I began to see how seriously scientists are taking this, I wanted to see. I mean, I kind of know what a simulation is, but I looked it up. I wanted to see what a simulation is for. Look at this. A simulation. What is the purpose of a simulation? It's to master something that is not known in a safe environment so that you understand how to use that before you get to the place where you really need it. Is it possible that you and I are living a reality here, learning about something, and we'll talk about what that something is? Are we learning something here in a relatively safe environment, given a period of time to do it, because we're going to need it somewhere else? Do you think that's a possibility? How does that feel to you? I mean, it's a bizarre concept, but how does it feel? Does it feel like maybe... Where have your spiritual and religious traditions said you're going to go when you finish here? Someplace else, right? And when you go there, the rules may be a little bit different. I began to ask the question, if we're here mastering an unknown, maybe how to use the language of the heart to create inner reality. Can you imagine what would happen if every thought, feeling, and emotion you had in every instant became manifest immediately? Wouldn't that be a pretty interesting world? Can you imagine if every passing thought that you had became a reality, how confusing your life and your world would be? Is it possible that we're here learning about the power of thought, feeling, and emotion, isolating the possibilities, choosing what we would like to experience, and learning to breathe life into that, to manifest it in a physical reality, and learn it really well here because we're going to need it when we get someplace else? Do you think that's possible? Maybe. Well, I began to ask the question, if it's true, who would make such a simulation? And the next question is, who would benefit from it? Who would benefit from that? You answer me. Who would benefit? Is it possible that you and I have created the simulation so that we can learn something here that we're going to need somewhere else? You know that you're not even in this room, right? You know that there's a part of you that's somewhere else. You communicate with it all the time, whether you call it a higher self or an over self or whatever it is. There's a part of you that's outside of this simulation somewhere, whatever it is. How does this concept feel to you? Is it a bizarre concept? Does it make sense? Okay, let's take it a little further. This is a quote from 2006 Templeton Award laureate John Barrow from Oxford University. Quote, he says, it's long been recognized that technological civilizations only a little bit more advanced than ours will have the capacity to simulate entire universes in which entities can emerge and communicate with one another. He's asking the question, has it already happened? Has civilization already advanced to the point where this is happening and we are living in the result of that? Does it sound like we just took a big step out there somewhere? Well, signs of a virtual reality. How would you know? Would you even know if you were in a simulation? Would you know it? I mean, the whole idea, if you step into a flight simulator, the whole idea is it's so real, you feel like you're in the cockpit of a plane, right? Or I worked for Martin Marietta. We put probes on Mars. We built simulations for the Martian surface. In there, it's supposed to be like the real thing. I believe that the world we're in, it's as real as we make it. What our science is showing us is that reality is malleable. It's soft. We can change it. And we change it through something that we are choosing to do inside of our bodies. So whether you're talking about the abundance in your checkbook or the healing of your body or the peace between nations, all of that is up for grabs because you and I are choosing it right now. And we're waking up to the fact that we have the power to make those choices. Signs of virtual reality. How would you know? Here's what a virtual reality looks like. I went to a couple of different sites. Virtual realities have a beginning and an end. They start somewhere and they end somewhere. The users have a point where they begin and where they end. There are rules in a virtual reality, in a simulation, and the idea is that as you use them more and more, you get better and better at what you're doing. Like maybe relationships. Like maybe feelings and emotions. In a virtual reality, the user is communicating with some form of themselves outside of the virtual reality. And there are choice points within the reality where they can change everything. Now this is how a virtual reality is defined. Does it sound familiar? Except for the context, it sounds a lot like what our most cherished and ancient spiritual traditions have always said, in a different language. There's a place where our universe began, whether we call it the Big Bang or in the beginning, somebody created it. It's got an end point, whether you call it the end of days or the last of days or whatever you want. It doesn't mean the world ends, it means the simulation ends. Users have a place where they come in and we leave. We're born and we die, or other things can happen. There are rules, and we call them the rules of physics as we're learning them, how we interact with our reality. We're supposed to get better at this stuff as we go along. We're communicating with something outside of our reality, whether we call it God or a higher self or angels or oversouls or whatever language you want to use. And there are choice points where we can jump from one possibility to another, except for the context. Doesn't it sound a lot like what we've been told for 5,000 years anyway? Maybe we are in a simulation, in a virtual reality. Nick Bostrom from the Department of Philosophy, Oxford University, wrote a paper. There's no question what this paper's about. Look at the title. Are you living in a computer simulation? I'm going to save you the whole paper. He goes through some very complex mathematics. He uses those mathematics to come up with three possibilities. Only one of those three applies to what we're doing right here. And here's that third possibility. Number 3, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. The odds are greater that we are in a virtual reality than we're not, based on the mathematics. Look at this. This is a quote. Seth Lloyd, MIT professor of programming. MIT professor. He was author of a book came out last year, Programming the Universe. He says that, quote, the history of the universe is, in effect, a huge and ongoing quantum computation. The universe is a quantum computer. He doesn't say it acts like or it's kind of like. He says it is a quantum computer. All right, if our universe is a virtual reality based in consciousness, in belief, how does it work? Let's go with this just for a minute, and then we're going to come back and do something with it. How does it work? Beliefs are binary. Would you agree with me that we either do or don't believe? You have a belief, it's either yes or no, right? Or it's off or on. When we believe, yes or no, off or on, we're having a feeling in our heart, electrical and magnetic fields that are changing the stuff our world is made of, right? Beliefs are binary. We either believe and create atoms, or we don't believe and there's no atom. Beliefs, binary. Yes, no, here, not there. Atom, no atom. The physical universe, from this perspective, is nothing more and nothing less than the beliefs that are on, and you're going to see an example in just a minute of how quickly you can turn a belief off and the atoms will disappear in response to that. The patterns of what we believe, those fields become the atoms of nature. We don't know if this is true or not. This is being seriously considered by people that you would be amazed to know are considering this. There's a whole workshop in there. The question, are we living a virtual reality? Is it a fact or is it a metaphor? Doesn't make any difference. And here's why. Either way, if it is truly what's happening, if it's not, it's a really good way to start the conversation. If it's a fact or it's a metaphor, here's why I'm even sharing it with you today. If you know the code, either way, fact or metaphor, if you know the code, you choose your own limits. And that's why I'm sharing it with you today. If you know the code of how this physical universe works, then you choose the limits of what's possible and what's not for you in your life. And it's not fairy tale and it's not make-believe, although there are fairy tales about this. It changes everything. It means every one of us has a vote. It means our future right now is up for grabs. I've done some very interesting programs in the last few months. Some of them have been in the D.C. area. You never know who's going to come to a D.C., Arlington, Virginia program. We've had government folks in there, and what they say is, there was a time we believed that somebody had a handle on everything, and something has gone awry. And we're here asking the same questions you all are asking. What's up? What's going on? They're asking the same questions. Something is changing right now. Electronic computers are based in numbers. You all know that. Underneath everything you type in your computer, you've got ones and zeros. They're programmed by numbers. Our consciousness computer is programmed by belief. So you can see the parallel. In an electronic computer, if your program has a glitch, you create something called a software patch. Have you all heard of a patch before? Remember the famous Y2K patch? All the clocks were going to stop at midnight, and they sent out a little piece of software. That was the patch that changed everything. If we're using this as an analogy in our consciousness program, if we're going to fix a glitch in consciousness, maybe we were never meant to come here to live in the fear and the pain and the suffering. Do you think that's the reason we're here? I don't either. I think it's a glitch in consciousness. And if it's a glitch and belief is the program, then what's the patch? So, how do we transcend those limits of belief? Well, the ancient instructions were shared throughout every spiritual tradition of the world, including ours. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, they were lost 1,700 years ago. And I know this is no news to most people in here, that 45 books were either completely edited or they were taken out altogether from what became our Western biblical text. 45 books, 20 were completely edited, another 25 were edited, condensed, and rearranged. We know this because we found those books in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Nag Hammadi Library, in the Coptic libraries of Egypt. We lost them in our culture. Other traditions haven't lost them. And that's, for me, the value. People have asked me, Greg, why go to these places in the world that are so low-tech when we live in this high-tech world? What can we possibly learn from these ancient traditions and ancient cultures? And I said, we can learn a lot. I was an engineer with security clearance working on the Peacekeeper missile during the Cold War, and I was taking trips to Egypt. And they don't like you going to Egypt a lot when you have a security clearance. They said, well, once is a vacation. How come you're going there time after time after time? Well, this is the reason why, whether we're and I'm showing a lot of these images from Nepal and Tibet, but it's from all over the world, because these people have a wisdom today that we lost, and it mirrors what our own science is saying. These are all holy people that have devoted their lives to the understanding that they can create something in their bodies that changes their world. And it's the way they live their lives. It was in this library where we found these books. And it was in these books where they have records of the things that were lost in our traditions, but the pages look like they would fall apart if you touch them, don't they? And they do. They're almost worthless. But what we know is for every one of these pages, there's a wooden block that was carved to make that page. So they shared that library with us as well. This is a library of the wooden blocks. Each block has the name of the book. See, these are all the same up here. That's the name, This is the chapter. Everyone's different, and this is the page. And they pulled out one of these, and these blocks of wood will last for thousands of years. They're made from a wood called ironwood. So they pull these out, they ink them up, the block, they lay a piece of paper, they roll over that block, and voila, you've got a brand new page from a 1,500-year-old book. I asked them to do this so I could share it with you today. And they're almost the same thing that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi Library. What do they say? Bottom line, everything's connected through a field. We now know that. Feeling and belief speaks to that field. We know that. But we're just arriving at this understanding. This is their culture. This is where they begin. It's where they've been for 1,500 years. This was the man, the beautiful man that I met in 1998. He's the abbot of this monastery. And it was this man, I asked the question, when we see your prayers for 14 and 16 hours a day, when we see the mudras and the mantras and the bells and the bowls and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, when we see your prayers on the outside, what's happening on the inside? And this is the man, very, very clearly, that said to me, you've never seen our prayers, because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things that we do to create the feeling in our bodies. The feeling is the prayer. The feeling is the prayer. Okay, you tell me, where does feeling occur? And what is the heart? What role does the heart play energetically in your body? It's the strongest what? Electrical and magnetic resonator in your body, generator in your body. If you're feeling in your heart, you're changing electrical and magnetic waves. It's changing the stuff around you. And he's telling us precisely this. The key is to feel from the outcome as if. If you're going to create in that world, you've got to give the field something to work with. Not that you're going to get to the healing or get to the peace. Our conditioning is that these things take a long time, a long, slow, arduous process of beginning to start the process of the path of eventual recovery to whatever it is that we're working for. Quantum physics doesn't work that way. Man, when there's a quantum change, what do we call it? It's a quantum leap. It happens like that. We come from the place it's already done. And this is what they're saying. Feel as if your prayer is already answered. Your body is already healed. Your perfect relationship is already here. That peace is already present. And when you do that, you'll change the cells of your body and you'll change the atoms of your world. And if we are truly living in a virtual reality, maybe this is what we came here to do. It's a different language. Maybe it's time to update our story. Maybe we've outgrown the 5,000-year-old story. When we're looking at cell phones and computers and the internet, maybe there's no wonder there's a disconnect between that and our ancient spiritual heritage, because maybe we've outgrown the language. The principles are there, same principles, but maybe we need a new language to describe that. It's a very powerful internal technology. It's a technology that you were born with, the power to communicate with the stuff your body and this universe is made of. Doesn't it make perfect sense that it would be that way? I mean, honestly, doesn't it? Whether we are living in a simulation, a virtual reality, the real thing, it's irrelevant. If you know the code, you choose the limits. And I think what's happening is that we have placed ourselves in the position where we've created in the world around us the conditions that are forcing us to come to terms with our reality. We must think about our world differently. We must think about our bodies differently, because we're creating conditions that we simply won't survive if we don't do that. And the power to do precisely that is what happens when we ask ourselves, who are we? Who are we? I'll tell you who we are, is that we are reality makers. That's who we are. The key is we can make only what we believe, and the power to do that is a power that truly lives in every single one of us. Every one of us. So as you go to all of the programs and all the wisdom and the brilliant minds and beautiful hearts of all the people who are here today, I'm just so honored to be sharing this conference with every one of them. My prayer is that this offers a bit of a context, kind of a global context, and everything everybody's saying fits in here somewhere, because they're all giving us tools to know how we do these things, how we become in our hearts the things that we choose to experience in our lives. And that's where I'm going to end today. You've all heard this before. The bottom line to all of this is that you don't have to know any of it. The monasteries in Tibet, those monks and nuns, they don't need to know any of this stuff, because they were born accepting it. In our left brain minds, we need a reason to think of things differently. The key is that we must literally become in our hearts the things that we'd like to experience in our world, and in that way, we are those reality makers.